Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scale or Stall. I'm Diana Wolf Torres of Deep Learning with the Wolf. We're recording and captions are on, so you can use the chat for quick note and the Q&A panel for your questions. Today is vendor fair and practical. You're going to leave with a clear view of where production inference should run so it scales and not stalls, and what to do next. And with that, I would like to introduce Dave Driggers, the CEO of Cirrascale. So I met representatives of Cirrascale at NVIDIA GTC, and I was very impressed. So Dave, as a refresher, can you tell us just a little bit about what it is that Cirrascale does and what it is that makes your company so special?
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, at Cirrascale, we really are focused on the enterprise clientele that are moving towards production. Not just pure research and development, but actually scaling their businesses for AI applications, both in training and more in inferencing, where the rubber really hits the road.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So before we dive in, I would love to do a quick poll. So everyone, you'll have about 15 seconds to answer. So please tell us your role and your stage at your company. So our first one is what best describes your role. And our second one is where are you in your deployment? And then we're going to pop up the answers so we can see what everyone said. So I'm curious to see the answers myself on this one. So we'll just give it a couple more seconds for people to answer and see what we got. Okay, so let's see. Number one we have on here, we have owners of businesses here today. And then after that, it looks like we have a lot of engineers and CTOs on the call here today. And in deployment, it looks like a lot of people are piloting. And then after that, they are in scaling and production. Is that about what you expected to see today, Dave?
That's what I expected to see. When we're meeting with enterprises today, nearly all of them are still in the pilot phase. They're really trying to figure out, or even earlier in POC, they're really trying to figure out is inferencing, is AI going to benefit their business? Just trying to figure out, is there a clear benefit prior to even trying to understand what the costs are or what the scaling requirements are going to be. They're still very much in POC phases.
That's fascinating. You know, that is just a great lead in to our first question. And our first question is about what's the three C's, basically, which is capacity, consistency, and control. So for inference in production, what fails first, the model or the infrastructure?
Typically it's the model. Especially when you're talking about in these POC phases, the models are never quite what the customer wants. If you're using Copilot or if you're using Gemini, you get a sense for what it can do for you, but it's not personalized. And therefore, the model itself just doesn't meet the expectations or the requirements of what the companies need. And that's kind of the challenge because doing a proof of concept with your own data is impossible. Without training your own model, you're going to be using a generic model out there. And so the model fails first. And that's one of the kind of the key blockers, because then they need to figure out, well, if it was my data, if it was specific to me, would it really make sense? Would it really improve how we handle things, and in production, would it actually benefit us?
That is so interesting. And I think that's a great time for us to lead into our second poll, which is where does your app primarily run today? Where does it live? And so again, we'll take maybe about 15 or 20 seconds to allow people to answer. And I'm curious to see if a lot of people are doing a DIY or where they've chosen to do, how they're choosing to do it. All right, so we have our results coming in. So it looks like we have our number one answer was people are doing hyperscalers. And then, oh, not sure. See, that surprised me. So, Dave, what surprised you the most about the answer that we got back from this particular poll?
Well, definitely the not sure is interesting. But the hyperscalers is the obvious choice because you're most likely running one of the foundational models. You're working with OpenAI at Microsoft, you're working with Claude, or you're working with Gemini. That's where nearly all of them are starting. That's where they're doing their POCs, and since most of them are still in the POC phase, that's why they're there. Now, the ones that are already moving forward with pilots, I would expect that they are either on-prem, still could be at a hyperscaler, or could be at one of the neoclouds like us. Because once you move into pilot, that's when you have a little bit more control, especially if you're not using one of the hyperscalers' foundational models.
I've heard there are 6 questions when choosing a home for inference. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So inference, it really depends. There's two main types of inference, first of all. You've got your real-time scenarios, chatbots, AI assistants. Those are, in general, need to be real-time because they're interacting with a human. So you can't just ask a question and then hope for the answer to come back tomorrow. And then there's the batch type processing. And these workloads are ones like processing a form or doing OCR, or where I don't have to have the answer immediately, but I need to have the answer eventually. But the answer has to be accurate, and I have to be able to hit economies of scale. If I'm processing 1 million forms and I need them done in 24 hours, it's not real time, but it's still scale. I've got to guarantee that I get these forms done. If I'm doing any kind of data processing that I'm going to need to interact on the next day or the following day, these are timeframes that I have to hit. So those are real challenges of just brute force scale and cost. And if I'm processing a lot of forms, that's where the one we've talked about here is data gravity. Wherever that data is going to be important for me in both form processing, because I got to move the data back and forth. It's got to be secure. And especially if it's real time, where I'm interacting with data that is, say, personal information or medical information, and I need that data to be able to have quick reactions and have that natural dialogue. So data gravity is always going to be important if we're dealing with either real-time scenarios that's touching live data, or bulk type work where if we're producing videos or images and I've got to move a lot of data back and forth, data gravity is like mission critical. So that one hits really high on the list depending upon what we're doing. With probably the next one that's most sensitive and hardest to deal with on where it goes is this concept of security. And this is where if I've got financial governance requirements or data security scenarios like with HIPAA, I need to be able to control that. And that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to inference and leveraging cloud is, how do I keep control and how do I keep security? How do I meet my requirements that I'm underneath because of, typically it's government, either medical or financial have the most governance issues.
That was fascinating. And I think that's going to lead us right into a great time to do just another poll and find out from the people who are taking our webcast today is what is their biggest blocker. So we'll take again just about 15 seconds to find out from that. And once we know what their biggest blocker is, maybe that's a good way to find out for the rest of this call, maybe how they can be helped the most. So I'm curious to see what the results are going to be of this one, since we've been surprised by the results of some of the other polls as they've come in. So really enjoying these polls. So let's see how this one came in. All right. Okay, cost and predictability. I mean, that was the overwhelming winner. So what do you think about the results of this one, Dave?
That was absolutely my expectation. I mean, the biggest challenge with using a hyperscaler right now, which this type of workload in theory is perfect for hyperscale, because the whole concept of hyperscale is variable usage of capacity. But the real challenge here is the variability is so variable and it needs to be real time that in most situations, it makes it very difficult to scale up and scale down, scale up and scale down, scale up and scale down, which is how inference works if you're doing these real-time interactive scenarios. That's really difficult to do on-prem because you have to build to scale, which means when you're not using it, it's being wasted. Therefore, just like with enterprise, when we moved the enterprise applications to the cloud so that we could get better utilization, cloud seems like the right place. But because we don't have predictable usage, we know it's going to go up during the day and then down at the end of the day, from a business case. But we don't know when or how, and therefore, or how often it's going to be used. Therefore, there's a lack of predictability, which means I don't know what I'm spending each day. I don't know what I'm spending by the end of the month. And that's very difficult for a CIO when they're trying to adopt a new piece of technology. Very rarely do CIOs get more budget to do something. Typically, they have to do more with the same or less budget. So they really need that predictable spend if they're going to adopt something new. And, frankly, that's where we're trying to make a difference as the type of cloud provider we are by selling it as a usage model, by the token, rather than making the end users spin up and spin down instances. They pay for usage, and we give them visibility on their usage so that they can be more predictable. They can have a better insight into how much they're using, how it's being used, and smooth out that workload. So I expected that because that's the hardest part about inferencing is the unpredictability and therefore the lack of predictability of what you're spending.
Now, before we move on to our next question, I just want to remind everybody who's on the call today that they can submit questions as we're going through, because at the end, we're going to do some Q&As with Dave. So, and you just do such a nice job here answering these questions. I know I'm learning so much, especially as even if I'm hearing you react to how the results are coming in from the call. So I do have so as we go through, we are going to go into another poll right now. So what predictability do you need the most right now?
See, I think this one's hard. I think most enterprises will want to check all the boxes and not just one.
I wonder if that's an option as they do the poll, right? Like, oh, it's a single choice, right? And so they're like, oh no, I want to choose more than one. See, that's interesting. I wonder if some people are like, I couldn't answer because it was so hard. So what do you think of the results there?
So again, if we're talking, I would say both. Or both of these seem to be the highest priority to our customers, especially if these are enterprise customers. Because enterprise, if I'm going to be adopting AI to either enhance a role or replace a role within my company, that cost has to be predictable because I have to be able to guarantee that this is a profitable endeavor. Again, I'm a CIO. I don't have more budget. I have the same or less. That's just, I hear it 95% of the time that they're not getting more money to do AI activities. They've got to do it with what they already have. And then the last one, governance. Without question, if I'm going to be putting my data, my customer information, my privacy information, governance is the other gotta have. So those are the two that I gotta have. I think reliability is really important, but it's not as mission critical as I can't spend more. It's not as mission critical as I've got to maintain my governance. So yes, I gotta be reliable, but if I'm not secure, it doesn't matter. I could give a crap about if I'm reliable or not. I've got to have the same level of security that my company demands. And I think, like I said, I do think for an enterprise and for a CIO to adopt an AI to replace somebody or an AI to generate more revenue, they've got to have that cost predictability.
So when inference fails, what happens then? How do we know what went wrong?
Well, ideally, you know what went wrong because your service provider or how you're doing it provides this observability. The second thing is, ideally, you put yourself into a situation where it doesn't fail. It ideally slows down. We really don't like it when it fails. I mean, this just happened because of a major AWS outage. It took tons of different enterprises offline who were doing just this, inferencing in the cloud. And we really don't want it to fail. At a minimum, we need it to keep going and just be slower. And frankly, it's how we're architecting and building our enterprise offering is to be an always on. Worst case scenario is it slows down, but it can't fail. We migrate the workload to another region that has excess capacity that's guaranteed to be there, but maybe your latency ticked up a little bit, but we can't have it fail. We really just don't have a choice for that.
I get so excited about the polls. I know I wanted to ask you about the decision rule, and I don't know if I got a chance to ask you about that. The decision rule for on-prem versus cloud.
Ooh, so on-prem is without question the easier from a control perspective. It's the more difficult from a cost perspective. It's also the more difficult from a latency scenario. If a company's business is multi-regional and these are real-time applications, the more the regions, the more difficult it is to do it on-prem. Because now I have to have my on-prem might have to be in the East Coast, West Coast, hell, it might be in Europe or in Southeast Asia. And that's really difficult from an on-prem perspective because I have to also build to peak. I can't just have, again, if this is answering my phone or providing support to customers in a real-time fashion, it has to be on. It has to be there. Now, it might be tolerable that it's a little bit slower depending upon what it's doing for the end customer or for the user, but it's got to be there. It's got to be on. And that makes it hard to scale. I mean, and do it in a cost-effective manner. And that's why cloud seems like the way to go. The real challenge with traditional cloud is that as a company, I have to actually spin it up and spin it down. And therefore, I've got to be monitoring where my workloads are and be able to spin up and spin down. Because in the cloud, if an instance is on, you're paying for it whether it's used or not. And that kind of defeats a whole lot of the purpose of cost savings.
Fascinating. So I think we have one final poll, do we? Let me just check with the people. Oh, we do. Okay. So what predictability outcome do you need the most right now? So let's see what people say on that one. All right, here we go. So, wow, again, we just have such overwhelming uh, results in one area, which is predictable monthly spend. So, Dave, what do you think of those results? Is that what you expected on this one?
What I expected. Definitely what I expected. The change velocity is interesting. And I think that is kind of part of the fact that we're still in this POC and pilot phases. And so people are trying to pick the right model, and it's hard to understand what's the right model. So you want to have the ability to roll forward and roll back and kind of test back and forth. Okay, did this model work really well with RAG? Uh, oh, it didn't work. I got to change to this model. How about this model with RAG? And then be able to measure that. And that's probably one of the other big challenges here is that being able to measure how my users are using the model, what feedback is, that's a bit of a challenge as well, especially during the fact that you're switching and switching. I heard some major frustration from one of our enterprise customers that we're targeting. I shouldn't say our customers, it's a potential customer. And one of the big feedback, we got to talk to some of the actual engineers who were actually using the models, and they were frustrated that the newer models didn't have their data that they had finally gotten into the older models. So then they finally had something that was predictable, that they knew how to use it, and then they got a new model, and it didn't have the data, so that they were almost back at square one with a totally different model. So I could see why that one would be a feedback here as well, is that this idea of during pilots and during POC phases, that being able to kind of roll forward, roll back, move data, and have something that is more measurable so that we know if we're making progress or not by picking a different model or by incorporating RAG. I could definitely see that. But again, number one's always going to be from a CIO's perspective, what's my cost? How can I measure it? How do I know it's going to be there next month? Especially when I'm dealing with, often when I'm dealing with data movement, especially at a hyperscaler, we don't know what the cost is going to be until the end of the month because we don't know how much data is being moved. We don't know where it's being moved to. So coming up with a fixed price for data and networking is probably mission critical to a lot of these folks as well, because that's where a lot of these variability costs are coming from.
So what you said there made me think about transparency, actually. Can you tell me more about transparent inference?
Oh, definitely. So one of our big so again, as an inference as a service operator, we're handling the model. We're deploying it where it needs to run. And in order to know on what kind of hardware it needs to run on, as well as where it needs to run, we actually monitor the actual usage of the model. So we see how many sessions, how large are the sessions, how many tokens are used for input versus output, and we use that to migrate the model and move it where it needs to be. We also provide that information and that observability back to the clients. That lets them know how their model's actually working. If they expected that a user would type in X number of tokens over 4 sessions to get to their answer, and instead it's taking twice as many tokens, or it's taking 10 times as many sessions to get to the answer, that's the critical information they need to be able to go back and change their model or go back and change the RAG layer. So maybe, and it also allows them to ask their customers or their end users, hey, why are you typing in so much? Or, hey, why are you using so many sessions to get to the answer? Or they can even see that all of a sudden the usage of it is tailing off, and they thought this was going to be a great tool for their customers, and yet their usage doesn't doesn't run the way they predicted, or they get a whole bunch more. But having that feedback on how their model's being used, we think is almost mission critical during this POC and pilot phasing, where they're trying to right size stuff so they can have these predictable outcomes, this predictable spend, predictable usage that so many people are really looking for AI to do for them.
So what I'm hearing from you there is transparency turns firefighting into tuning, and that's how you avoid stalls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you're trying to, as a CIO, you're trying to force this on your users. Um, but because you really need them to use it to kick the tires so that you can actually look at it and understand, is it a benefit? Or are we just spinning our wheels? And are we going down a path that's just going to create frustration? Are we going down a path that's actually going to lower our productivity? So having the observability in what they're doing, uh, as much as they can get, both from a holistic view as well as from the individual session, is what's going to allow companies to migrate to these applications, to change them real time, to make them where they actually become useful.
So just want to remind everyone they can still put questions in the chat if they would like. But if you want time with the team, now is the moment. And as a bonus, if you book within the next 24 hours, you'll get a tailored pilot plan, a short shareable package with your goals, a reference architecture, milestones, risks, and the next clear step to production. So, all right, we do have some questions coming in. So, question number one, for production inference, What's the first sign we're missing one of the three C's? And what's the quickest fix that you would recommend?
Hmm, that's a good question. The first sign is that users aren't using your users aren't using the platform. You were expecting 40% of your users to use the platform, and instead you're getting 20%. Um, that and how do you fix it? That I don't know how you fix it, honestly. You got to talk to your users about why they're not using it. And the key there is listening. If you have visibility into your model, look at how it's being used. As I say, if you are expecting 4 sessions to get to your answer and it's taking people 6 or 8 or 10, you have your answer. It's frustrating. It's not as easy to use, or the answers aren't coming back as good as they should be, and it's causing churn. So it's really that's probably the main thing is you don't see users using it because in general, you want your users to be seeing this as a tool and seeing this as a tool that makes them more productive, makes their life better, gives them better answers. Obviously, if it's a chatbot that's for support and they're mashing the zero button to get to an operator, that's a bad thing. I know that me personally, when I've got a really good chatbot that answers my questions, understands my voice, understands the questions, I'm fine not talking to a person. But when it doesn't, holy crap, I'm mashing that button.
So we have another question coming in. Actually, the questions are really good. So our second question is, as an SAS provider, I like to have choice to run my workflows at the near edge. What are the features and values that I will get from Cirrascale from infrastructure perspectives? As SaaS, I would just like to worry about my workflow and not the infrastructure.
So, and I think that's where a lot of the inference is going to wind up. It's going to wind up near edge because we're going to be moving a lot of data, especially if we're doing any kind of data analysis, etc. And people don't like to wait. I can tell you that's probably the most frustrating thing is when you're trying to interact with data, the last thing you want to do is wait for a download. Therefore, you need that data near the edge so that it gets to you quickly. One of our frustrations we hear from one of our bigger customers right now is how do we make this, how do we fix this so that the data gravity is closer and yet secure? So we're going to see a lot of these scenarios where the data needs to be near edge, especially if it's being interacted on a regular basis by the users who are at the edge. So we think we're going to be reimagining these centralized clouds or these centralized databases, and it's going to be a big need to have at least bits and pieces or key constructs local. So we're going to see kind of a lot of near edge data centers for inference purposes, especially when there's a lot of data that's being interacted with.
Hmm, great questions. They just keep coming in. So here's another one. Using the venue fit matrix, when would you tell a team to stay on the hyperscaler versus move to a specialty CSP like Cirrascale?
So hyperscalers are phenomenal for early development, for experimentation, when I need to spin a bunch of stuff up and spin it down. When I'm doing experiments, and they're fantastic for that. None of the neo clouds are really designed to give you 1,000 cores of CPUs because your particular application needs a bunch of CPUs for an hour. We're just not designed for it. Whereas the hyperscalers, this is what they do. These are the way the enterprise type workloads often worked. And the same thing we would say when your data is not as important to move a bunch of data, because hyperscalers are really bad at that, but they're great at ingesting data. They don't charge you to bring the data in. So if you're doing a lot of data collection that you're going to be looking at, hyperscalers, fantastic for that because they've got lots of endpoints. They can bring data in from lots of places, and they don't really charge for that ingress. Now, if you need to take the data out, that's when they get you. So I don't recommend them for that type of situation. But if you're doing lots of experimentation, lots of data collection, hyperscalers are fantastic for those types of scenarios.
Questions keep coming in. I love this. So this one's a little similar to the last question, but if we choose Cirrascale, what is your difference from Google Cloud, AWS, et cetera, in terms of service and cost? And they said thank you.
So,
So
so,
toss that in.
yeah, so we're very much from the ground up. We're designed for customers who are going to be on for extended periods of time. So as you move to later stages, and you're not just in that experimentation phase, but you're going to be on and stay on. If you're on and stay on, as soon as you pass 8 hours of usage a day, we are typically 40–50% cheaper than a hyperscaler. And as you scale up, that becomes even more impactful because then we can actually tailor and tune the platform to how you're using it, and then we can see even higher cost savings. And then the most important thing is it's a predictable cost. It's not going to change. What you go into the month is what you leave the month. And so typically we're much less expensive. The more you use it, it's almost one of the Jensenisms. The more you buy, the more you save. With us, the more you use it, the more you save. From a service perspective, we're white glove. It's all we offer. So we really like to be an extension of a company's DevOps or infra ops and really handle the IT services. We don't charge for it. It's part of our cost. And it's part of our delivery model is to have a high touch and full service, full service offering.
I love that you brought in a Jensenism. That was great. So do we have any more questions coming in? Just checking with the team in the back. So, oh, wait, yes, we do. Okay, just waiting for them to come in. So, okay, here's the next question. If our biggest blocker is unpredictable spend, what telemetry should we watch? And what knobs do we adjust first to stabilize costs?
So if we're talking about a hyperscaler, without question, watch your data. Find a way to measure your data. How's it being moved around? Because that's the biggest hidden cost that catches you at the end of the month. And it's also the hardest to wait to the end of the month to actually then unwind what happened during the month. Try to monitor how your data is being used. Get a tool that measures where is this data coming in, going out to on a daily basis. So if it's a hyperscale situation, it's always the data. When it comes to inferencing with us or inferencing with another vendor, probably there is to look at your input, the number of input tokens versus what you thought you were going to do. Don't focus on the output tokens. Look at your input tokens because and how many sessions, because that tells you how useful is it compared to what you thought it was going to be. How much are your users having to type in? How many sessions are they running to get to an answer? Because your output ultimately will be controlled by how many inputs, how many sessions. Your those output tokens that are worthless, they're costing you money. You want to get to the answer as soon as possible. So monitor the sessions. See how many tokens are going in, see how many sessions you're doing. That's the most critical to changing your unpredictable spend is from an inference perspective, is focusing on the input tokens to get to your result.
So more questions coming in. Does Cirrascale have your own cloud platform then?
Absolutely. We're what's coined as an EOScale, but we're not a neoscale that runs on somebody else's equipment. Either we own our equipment or our customers own the equipment. We do allow, and we've got a very different model from most cloud providers in that we do allow our customers to own some of the equipment. This is often important, especially with companies or research or nonprofits, federal SLEDs, who their funding requires them to have a predictable spend, and they can a lot of times control that spend by owning the equipment and making sure that they own the equipment for the life of the funding. So quite often we see nonprofits require to own the equipment and then have a set 5 year contract. Therefore, they know their cost for 5 years and it's fully funded. They also own the equipment at the end of it, so they're not worried about, something being pulled away or clawed back. So that's definitely a situation, but we don't run on somebody else's platform. We don't run another hyperscaler. We're not a broker. Either we own the equipment or our customers own the equipment. It's in our data centers. Not that we own our data centers, but we have long-term contracts and we colo, but same thing there. We control the data centers. Typically, we're the anchor tenant or the sole tenant if it's a training or large inference site. Now, with inference as a service, we don't own the data centers. We're not the large clients because those data centers look more like carrier hotels. So there's lots of users, lots of connectivity. So those are different, but we still have long-term contracts and we still control from the data center all the way up to the end user's application.
Carrier hotels. I like that. That's so interesting. So, all right, more questions coming in. So, how do you decide what runs on-prem versus in the cloud for hybrid inference? And then there's going to be a second part, but I'll let you answer the first part first.
So often certain things have to stay on-prem because of governance and security. They just can't get to where they need to be with any cloud provider, or they have to go through a long audit process. We worked with one client, it took them 18 months to get an MSA that passed through their security and governance requirements. And yet they needed to get started right away. Well, if you need to get started right away and it's going to take 18 months to get through an audit, clearly you're going to be on-prem to start, even if you're in that early phases and you're just kind of struggling. So quite often, people start on-prem because they've got to get a guarantee of the security and the governance outside of it. So that starts on-prem a lot. Sometimes key information has to stay on-prem or has to be completely encrypted in flight at all times. So it's never stored somewhere unless it's encrypted. It never becomes unencrypted. So often that always starts on-prem, and then can migrate into a hybrid scenario once we know the security is set. A lot of times you start on-prem because that's where you're developing. That's where your core users are. So you start on-prem, and then as you roll out a product, you roll it out kind of one region at a time while you're trying to figure out what your latency requirements are, what your data movement costs are going to be. So quite often things start on-prem when I want to control my costs.
Here's the second part of that question. How do you keep versions, SLAs, and routing consistent across both?
Uh, by observing and measuring. We offer tools for observability. Some of our large OEM partners, I mean, Cisco has some products that are fantastic when it comes to observability, so I can actually see where my bottleneck is, from endpoint to endpoint, from the user to where the application resides, monitor and measure. And that's how you can really see and maintain your SLAs, because you can figure out where's your bottleneck and then prepare for it or fix it or route around it. But the key there is observability, is trying to step up your game to try to figure out where my slowdown is, and it's something that we try to assist with. It's definitely something that we encourage our customers to pay attention to and invest a little bit into that observability, because it'll pay off in the long run for both understand predictable scaling, for really understanding your costs.
So, questions keep coming in. I love it. So, here's our next question. In the case that your customer owns the equipment, how do you guys charge normally?
So just like most data centers, and I mean, most data centers charge based on power. Frankly, so do we. We look at how much power the system is using, how much space it's taking up, and then we charge management fees that are based upon that. The biggest benefit that the customer is getting is we're not charging them for the depreciation of that equipment. And quite often, our customers have a much lower cost of capital than we do. Plus, they can do a full write-off. Often it's easier for them to write off that equipment as a capital expense, So there's additional savings there. I don't need to make money on somebody else's technology. We charge them for effectively for the data center and the data center and the management of that equipment slash data center services. So and we measure it by the power, you know, because that's what our biggest cost once you get to the data center is the power. And not the usable power, mind you. It's the UPS, it's the generator, it's the chiller, which all ties back to how much power does the system use.
So this is going to have to be our final question. We had so many questions come in. It was amazing. So our final question is, can you break down in simple terms, actually it's a two-part question, in simple terms, what Cirrascale brings to the table, and what are the key advantages or differentiators that makes the Cirrascale approach stand out?
So we effectively give our customers the best of both worlds. So we compete against, from a cost perspective, against on-prem. We compete against cloud with a cost perspective because we do support that variability. But the biggest differentiator between either of these situations is that we're a full service shop. You know, we take over a lot and as many responsibilities from DevOps to InfraOps, the actual services pieces, it's what we do. So we extend or expand IT services that a company has on-prem. We also don't make them change what they're doing. If they're a Cisco house or they're a Dell house or they're an HPE house that they've gotten used to the tools that come from those partners, we allow them to keep those tools and we extend them and make them cloud friendly. So we don't make them change how they do things. And it just makes we're much more extensible that way to move people towards a hybrid type scenario. And we definitely believe within inferencing, it's going to be a hybrid world. There's going to be situations where we've got to be connecting to the hyperscaler because they do certain pieces of it better than we do, better than on-prem does. There are going to be certain pieces that have to be on-prem. We want to be that middle guy who who embraces this multi-environment and allows people to simply move back and forth between on-prem and cloud.
These questions were so good that just came in. So I just want to remind people that they can book their predictability briefing, which is a 30-minute working session, which allows you to align your service level objectives, your latency targets, and your path to production. So this is a special briefing that you can get if you just book within the next 24 hours because you attended this session today. So there's a QR code for you right there on the screen. So be sure to click on it and receive your tailored pilot plan. So Dave, thank you so much for the insights today. This has just been so enlightening to speak with you today. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining today. So Dave, do you have anything else that you want to add before we close up today?
I don't think so. I mean, I can, other than, you know, we really appreciate interacting with our customers, even if you don't, or even our potential customers, even if you don't go with us, we still learn. Hopefully you learn from us. So it's part of our whole business model is this consultative process where we actually want to understand what our customers are doing and what they're trying to solve for.
So thank you everyone for joining and for all of those questions and participating in our polls. So we're going to send the recording and the materials shortly. And so everyone have a great rest of your day. So thank you, everyone.